Hello and welcome to another episode of Communication How. Now, in the previous episodes, we have dealt with the other traditions of communication theory. We have seen the cybernetic, semiotic, phenomenological, socio-cultural, socio-psychological traditions, and others. So today we will take a look at a tradition that is quite important in our day-to-day lives, wherein we communicate. We generally have aspects with regards to this particular tradition. Today we shall deal with the rhetorical tradition. Now, what does the rhetorical tradition imply? What are the key ideas? And what do we need to focus when we consider this tradition? All this and more will be discussed in today's episode. So, before we begin, we can probably ask ourselves a few questions. Do you enjoy learning how to communicate effectively, especially in public situations? Or would you enjoy being a speaker, maybe a politician or a minister? Does public art as a symbolic statement intrigue you? Do you like to study texts and think about their meaning and their impact on society and on day to day life? Well, if the answer to most of these questions is yes, then you're probably drawn towards the rhetorical tradition within the communication theory. Now, let's come to the basics of this tradition. The word rhetoric often has a pejorative meaning today. It means empty or ornamental words in contrast to action. And however it is said, in actuality, the study of rhetoric has distinguished history dating back in the West to the 5th century BC Greece. Now, the study of rhetoric is really where communication discipline began, because rhetoric, broadly defined, is human symbol use. That means how we as humans use symbols in various ways in order to communicate stuff to others. Now, it was originally concerned with persuasion, but now we see rhetoric is considered as the art of construction making, especially of constructing arguments and speech making. It has then evolved to include process of adjusting ideas to people and people to ideas. So in this way, we see that whenever we are giving a particular talk, we will look at the audience that is there, and based on the audience, we will generally try to adjust our content. If the audience is merely children, therefore we will use certain techniques in order to communicate the same matter to them. Of course, the language that we use will be different, will be much more simpler. And also we will avoid using complicated terms and words. But if the same content has to be addressed to a learned crowd, to a more mature crowd, then obviously we will have to step up our game. And of course, the content will have to be delivered in a more systematic and in a more professional manner. And therefore, we see that the focus of rhetoric has broadened in recent times. And therefore, now it includes all the ways in which humans use symbols to affect those around them and to construct the worlds in which they live. And without any further delay, we can have a look at some of the key ideas in the rhetorical tradition. Now, we see that central to the rhetorical tradition are 5 canons of rhetoric. Now, which are the 5? Well, first is invention, then you have arrangement, style, delivery, and memory. Now, these were the elements in preparing a speech, and the rhetor in ancient Greece and Rome was concerned with the discovery of ideas, their organization, choices about how to frame those ideas in language, And finally, issues of delivery and memory. Now, with the evolution of rhetoric, we see that these five canons have undergone a similar expansion. So, therefore, when we speak about the five canons, it is important to understand that these are concerned with discovery of ideas, especially with regards to how do we organize these ideas, and also the choice of words that we have, especially with regards to the matter and the content, what we want to convey. Sometimes we see it may be difficult in order to choose between many ideas, but this choice plays a very important part as to how the talk will be appreciated or how the talk will be looked at by the others who are the listeners. And then we also see that it involves using ideas in languages, how to frame the ideas in language, and how do we deliver this to the larger audience. So, therefore, we see that all the five canons that are there in the rhetorical tradition are the ones that we normally use in our day to day speaking. Sometimes we may not be fully aware of it, but we do tend to use this in our day to day communication. So let's take a look at these one by one. So we see that invention now refers to conceptualization, the process through which we assign meaning to symbols through interpretation. It also basically refers to an acknowledgement of the fact that we simply do not discover what exists, but we create it through the interpretive categories that we use. Next, we see that arrangement. So, arrangement is basically the process of organizing symbols, arranging information in the light of relationships among the people, symbols, and context involved. So, whenever we are presenting a particular argument, we see that the way we arrange our thoughts, the way we arrange our ideas, play a very important role in how the talk will be received by those who are listening. And therefore, we see that what is really important at this point of time is knowing how to organize our content, how to organize our matter in the best possible and in the most professional manner. So, for example, even when it comes to simple tasks such as preparing your assignment or even answering an essay question, you see that your ideas have to be arranged logically. You should have a flow in your answer or in your assignment. And we see that that flow is something that will lead to a much better choice and a much better alternative when it comes to having a more larger impact on the audience. At the same time, we see that style plays a very important role. Now, what does style concern with? So, style concerns all of the considerations that are involved in the presentation of the symbols, from choice of symbol, system, to the meanings that we give to those particular symbols. At the same time, it also involves the symbolic behavior from words and actions to clothing and furniture. So, in a way, we see that when we refer to style, it basically refers to the way in which we present our particular argument. Nowadays, with a lot of choice, we can also use various modes of presentation. You have the PowerPoint presentations. You can also go old style by using a chart and a board in order to present your stuff. But what matters is how do you use the things that are given to you? Most importantly, we see now from words and actions to also clothing and the accessories that you have make a difference in how the matter that you present is sort of appreciated or accepted by the others. And therefore, you see that your style of presentation, whether it includes your sense of dressing up or even your style of presenting the content, will have an impact on whether your talk is appreciated by the audience or no. Next, we see that delivery. Delivery, we see of late, has become the embodiment of symbols in some physical form, encompassing the range of things from nonverbals to talk to writing, as well as mediated messages. So, in other words, we can see that it encompasses a large range of field. So it includes options from non-verbals, that is the basic sign languages or gestures that we tend to use, to normal speaking, the talking that we have, as well as it includes also writing, as well as mediated messages. And in this way, we see that all these aspects play a very important role in how the content that we have is delivered from ourselves to the audience at large. And finally, we have memory. Now, memory, earlier one would probably think is with regards to memorizing speeches, with regards to memorizing materials in order to present them. But we see that memory no longer refers to simple memorization of speeches, but it refers to larger reservoirs of cultural memory. At the same time, it also refers to processes of perception that affect how we retain and process information. So we see that when we go to a particular place, we will have some kind of information with regards to the culture of that particular place. Or we may also have some kind of information with regards to what kind of topics would normally attract or would be of interest to the people. And therefore, when we go to that particular place in order to deliver a lecture or a talk, automatically from our memory, we would derive all this data that would be useful for us in order to convey our information in a more practical and in a more suitable manner. And therefore, we see that memory would involve using all the data that we have from the past, whether we have experienced it or whether we have heard it from the others. And this data is then processed and used for the best possible and effective result. And now we see that regardless of the choice of symbol and medium, the rhetoric would involve a rhetor or a symbol user. And the rhetor is the one who creates a text or artifact for a particular audience. And this could be subject to various situational constraints. Now we see that the term rhetoric is also used as synonymous with the term communication. And the decision as to which term is to be used, whether we use rhetor, whether we use rhetoric, or whether use communication, the decision of this largely depends on the philosophical tradition with which you identify yourself with. So basically, it would refer to the situation in which you are in, whether you would use communication or whether you would use the term rhetoric in order to explain your point of view. So in fact, what we see is that we need not focus any much more on the rhetoric part of it, but we see that what is important is how this plays a very important role in our day-to-day communication and how it helps us in order to communicate various aspects in the best possible manner. So let us take a look at some of the salient features in this rhetorical tradition. First and foremost, we see that the rhetoric word has a pejorative meaning, as we have already seen. So earlier, it would basically refer to empty or ornamental words. That means if a person spoke using flowery language, it would mean that, oh, the person is a good speaker. But of late, we have seen that the term rhetoric has broadened, and it basically refers to much more things that we would use in our communication, in basically presenting our material from one source to another. Now it says that the term rhetoric goes back to the 5th century BC Greece. And originally, it was concerned with persuasion. So it basically would refer to the ways in which we were able to persuade one another, how a person was able to sell his ideas to others, how he could convince others with his talk. But as we have seen already, the term rhetoric involves much more than all this. When it comes to the rhetorical tradition, we see that central to this tradition are the five canons of rhetoric. And therefore, these are the elements that are involved in preparing a speech. And at the same time, these elements need to be kept in mind when we are delivering a particular content to the desired audience. Now, we see that even in ancient Greece and Rome, when they spoke of the rhetor or of the speaker, it was concerned that all these elements were working with unison with one another. That means all the five elements that we have seen were ones that were used in proper coordination. That means you could see that when a person spoke, he would have to have invention. That means he would have to invent certain ideas, and at the same time, there would be an arrangement, there would be a logical flow in his argument. His style, the way he presented himself would matter. Similarly, the way he would deliver the content was important, and whether he could draw certain things from memory in order to make his talk more effective to the others. At the same time, we see that rhetoric tends to be used synonymously with the term communication. And as we have already seen, what matters is how we use this word and in what context. So whether you want to use the word rhetoric or if we want to use the term communication, it depends on the philosophical tradition. And most importantly, in simple words, it depends on the situation in which we find ourselves in. And therefore, we see that the theory of invitational rhetoric, okay, this inviting might be as or more effective in certain communication contexts than persuasion. So, as we said earlier, it was basically earlier considered dealing with how to convince others or no. But therefore, we see now the theory of invitational rhetoric is more effective in certain communication contexts. And thus, we see that what is important is how we consider these techniques, how we use rhetoric in our day to day life. I'm sure if you pause for a while, you will be able to identify certain key elements, certain ways in which you, as a speaker, were able to use these elements in your day to day talking, or when you went to present a talk, or when you went to address a group of people. You will be able to identify clearly these five elements that you have used. So this is all for this episode. And we have seen that we have completed the 7 traditions of communication theory. Next time around, we will be taking a look at communication theory and what are involved in the process of communication theory. We'll take a look at some of the elements that are important in theory, and then we shall take a look at some of the theories in communication. So till then, thank you and see you next time.